Hey, it's your intimacy expert, Dr. Viviana Coles, and I'm excited to share the following real Ask Me Anything chat with someone who found me online. Going into our video chat, all I knew is that she wanted to know if I thought watching porn was healthy in relationships. What you'll hear next is a barely edited for time, real conversation with a very sweet woman whose identity is kept confidential. I received express permission to share this conversation with others, and everyone involved understands that my recommendations should not substitute for or constitute as professional counseling. If you'd like an opportunity to ask me your relationship and intimacy related questions, DM the letters AMA for Ask Me Anything to at drviviana.com on Instagram, and I'll send you the link to submit your question. Enjoy! Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to hear what your questions are, and of course, to helping you to get the answers that you need, and not just the answers that you need, but probably the answers that so many people out there do need. So, thank you so much for joining me, and we can just jump right in. So, what was your question?
My biggest question is because I know, as you know, I'm pretty well aware that, porn does exist. I know that, a lot of people have exposure to it from, who knows, from a very young age and stuff like that. And I know it's something that it's not going to go away. It's there. It exists. My questions are more of like in relationships. I've this is my longest relationship. I've never been in a relationship before. And I know that I've seen or heard stories of like one person viewing porn and stuff like that, and how it affects the relationship, especially in the long run. If this is a relationship, I'm currently engaged and on my way to be married, and I know it's a concern that I have. Because I do love this person, but I want to make sure that what effects it has. I know I'm well aware that my partner watches porn, and I don't want to seem oblivious in regards to whether, basically my questions are, is it normal? Is it normal for people or my partner to watch a lot of porn? Is it something that I should be concerned about? Is it something that is just going to affect our relationship?
I love this question. I think it is actually a very common question that comes from a place of fear. A lot of people really worry about how does pornography negatively impact relationships, especially when it comes to physical intimacy. Some people have seemingly no problem with pornography, and others have very strong opinions against the use of pornography in relationships. What I will tell you is that as I've worked in the past 20 years, as I've grown as a therapist and as I've grown as a relationship therapist, I've noticed that there is far more of a negative impact on relationships as far as the likelihood than positive. That's not to say that all pornography is inappropriate for relationships, but certainly there's more risk involved. And some of the surface level risk that I see most often is it can really change your opinion about your own experiences in the bedroom. It can impact the way and influence the way that you feel things should be going in your relationship as far as your sex life. And unfortunately, we're talking about something that is not realistic and
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes not even real.
All right.
Everything about the typical, even amateur pornography is produced
Mm-hmm.
and is meant to kind of feed into fantasies, whether those fantasies are healthy or not in relationships. They don't usually care about that. It's a lot like clickbait online, where everything is just getting a click, getting a view. And oftentimes, the more outrageous and non realistic,
Mm-hmm.
that's what people are really trying to accomplish. Now, that said, there are some healthier ways to experience the positive effects of pornography. Like, for some people, they really want to watch pornography to help them to become aroused through visual stimulation. And
Right.
some people do try to get ideas from pornography about what they might be wanting to do in the relationship. I would tell you that pornography isn't going to be the place that's going to help you educate yourself on like what's possible out there, as well as possibly going online and checking out some really healthy education choices. People, what they will say is that when they watch pornography, all people, they tend to want to do it to kind of fast track their arousal.
Mm.
Unfortunately, what I've noticed for a lot of women is that we tend to get caught up in the not so sexy side of it. We tend to focus in on how sweaty people get, the discomfort of the positions that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of get in because we tend to see ourselves in these positions, and so we're kind of like, oh my gosh, if that were me, this is how I would be feeling, or yuck, I don't like the placing of that piercing. I mean, we tend to kind of rip it apart. And unfortunately, that can ruin the entire experience of whether you're masturbating or whether you're with a partner. It can kind
Mm-hmm.
of cloud the entire thing. Whereas with
Mm.
men, they do a better job at, but that can also cause problems in their relationships, is that they're very focused, laser focused on the actual money shot, so to say. So they're looking at the penis vagina penetration, they're looking at mouths, they're looking at parts of
Oh.
the whole. And women tend to look at the whole instead of the parts. And that's WHOLE, not HOLE. So we're having these different ways of looking at pornography, and unfortunately, it can keep us not on the same page with our partners
Mm.
about it. Now, frequency of pornography is also uh, problematic and controversial. Some people will say that looking at pornography on a daily basis has no bearing on how they behave or what their expectations are in partnered experiences in real life. And others will say that every time they look at pornography, what they look at is so far out there that they feel dejected because they won't ever be able to get that in real life. And it feels like
Oh.
it's only going to stay in fantasy. So it's a very complex situation, as you can tell.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about pornography, tell me a little bit about what you think the positive side of it is and has been, or if there has been any positive side to it.
I guess like you said, for arousal moments, or because it just, it makes you feel a certain way just because it wakes up that feeling. So when I've seen it, I know that I react a little bit to it, or when I've seen it in the past or been saw it, I know that I would feel a certain way. And sometimes I like, even the whatever it is, it like you said, it plays with your fantasy a little bit, in the sense that I feel like, well, I for me, I actually feel that it was a negative effect, just because it's like, when I view pornography, I feel like I'm supposed to react that way. I'm supposed to feel that way. And if I don't feel that way, then I'm not doing it right.
Okay, so this idea of this is a template for you to follow, this is a
Mhm.
guide of, maybe you're supposed to experience desire, arousal, orgasm within
Right.
5 minutes.
Right.
Or maybe what they're doing, the sexual activity that they're partaking in, it is something that you think, oh, so I guess it's supposed to feel like that, or it's supposed to have that. The
Right.
other thing is the performative piece of pornography can also make a lot of people think that they have to perform in the same way, whether it's their vocalizations, the way that
Hmm.
their bodies are moving,
Hmm.
the things that they're saying. A lot of that is something that for a lot of people they feel like, well, I tend to get very quiet when I'm aroused, or maybe they
Right.
think, I like to try different positions, and other people are like, I like to stay in the same position. And so
Hmm.
it can really change again and impact the way that you feel about what your own experiences are like.
Hmm.
Something that I will tell people is, you know, there are parts of that fantasy that if you can keep them in the fantasy are good, because then you can go back and fantasize about it later on. But then there
Hmm.
are other parts that you can't ever really know how they're going to impact you positively or negatively
Hmm.
until you've already seen them. For instance, rape fantasies, or anything that looks like it could be non consensual. There's such a thing as secondary trauma. So sometimes people might be looking at something that they think, well, this is fake, it's produced, it's just a film.
Hmm.
But depending on what your own experiences are, with these situations, it might impact you negatively
Mm-hmm.
in such a way that it could possibly cause a secondary trauma. And that's, of course,
Mm-hmm.
something that you want to try to avoid, especially when you're trying to experience the pleasure of
Mm-hmm.
sexuality.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, another thing that I deal with a lot of insecurities. So I know that when I see these women in porn, like they're skinny, they have big butts, they have, big chest and stuff like that. And I don't look that way. And considering that I'm also an introvert, it just makes me close up even more.
So, what I hear you saying is that sometimes pornography will bring out some insecurities that you have about your own physical appearance. Is that
Hmm.
accurate?
Yes,
Okay.
that is accurate. And
Um,
because I
so,
know that my partner views that, I don't know, like I feel like, okay, well, if we're doing what I felt before is that if we're in the bedroom or something like that, I don't want to be constantly thinking, oh well, is he fantasizing? Is he thinking about what he saw online or whatever he viewed? Is he thinking that while we're trying to be intimate? And if I don't look that way, would it, mess things up? It like messes with my head.
so I love this. It's unfortunate that you're experiencing that at all, but it is such a common thing to say, I don't look like what my partner might be looking at online and getting off to.
Mm.
And how does that impact us? How could that impact him and his feelings towards me or towards his attraction to me? A
Mhm.
super valid concern that I hear a lot. And it goes in all ways. So, for instance, a lot of the men who are stars in pornography videos, they are completely not typical or average when it comes to their build, when it comes to the
Mhm.
way that their penises look. And certainly, they use a lot of enhancements and
Mhm.
injections and all sorts of different tricks and hacks to help them to look good on camera and appear and perform
Mhm.
well on camera. So, but what I hear you saying is that when it comes to the women that he may be looking at on camera, if he's looking at women that don't look anything like you and he's aroused by them and he even orgasms through looking at them, you're concerned of what could that be doing for his attraction to me.
Mhm.
And what I would say is that it really just depends on how conscious he is of the kind of pornography that he's looking at and whether or not he is able to say, this is just a movie. This is something that I'm not necessarily picturing myself with this person. Maybe he's able to compartmentalize it in. Or
Mhm.
he might struggle with that and say, well, I love my partner. I think she's hot for who she is, but
Mhm.
I like to look at big butts. And she doesn't have one, but that doesn't mean that there aren't women out there in pornography that I could look at. It
Mhm.
doesn't always equate he likes this, he doesn't like this. It could be
Mhm.
that he likes all of it. Um, it could be that it's as simple as wanting what you don't have and exploring that in a safer way, which for him, he might be thinking that, well, if I'm looking at it in pornography, that's not cheating. Whereas if I was seeking someone out who had a different build in real life, that might be cheating. And that kind of
Mhm.
opens up another part of this discussion, which is this idea of, is looking at pornography, should it always be considered cheating? Is it considered cheating? Um, but going back real quick to the idea that you were talking about with insecurities for yourself, I'm a big fan of being your own biggest fan. And
Mhm.
if your partner has said things or alluded to the fact that he's not attracted to you because of the way that you look or because of different the differences that makes in comparisons that he makes to other people, that would be something to get some help with
Mhm.
because first of all, that's really hard to hear, right? And it's
Right.
hard to let it, as confident as you might be in your own self, I can see how it would cause insecurities. Now, if it's not causing him any problems as far as his sexual functioning, as far as his care and love for you and his
Mhm.
desire for you, then it's probably just a matter of wanting variety and wanting to see variety.
Mm,
I think that it's really got to be a case by case example when it gets to the details of what's going on and if it's a problem. But I think
mhm.
you can even ask him, like, hey, when you're looking at pornography, are you looking at things that are realistic? Are you looking at it in a way of just saying, like, I really, sorry, is that your cat?
Yeah, he's is I try to keep him out, but and I try to give
That's
him treats,
totally
but
fine.
I'm so sorry.
That's totally fine. So, going back to experiencing insecurities as a result of what your partner is looking at through pornography, obviously that's a really natural reaction. But more than anything, I would want to know as a sex therapist, is your partner only looking at pornography and only programming himself to be excited by things and people that are completely different than what he has in his real life? If he
Mm,
does, that doesn't mean that he's necessarily in the wrong. He might be training himself to really only respond arousal wise and to the stimulation of something that is very different than what he has in real life. So he might be working against himself, so to say. So
oh.
if he's looking at pornography that's totally different, that's in a complete fantasy, it's the opposite of you, it's the opposite of anything he actually does,
Mhm,
it could be that he's keeping it in like, well, this is just fantasy. I don't expect this to be real. Just like when
mhm,
we're watching cartoon movies, a lot of it can't possibly be real. There's a lot of
mhm,
sci-fi where we're like, we can enjoy it without thinking, I wonder what it would be like to go into outer space without a helmet, you know? And then there's the other part of it, which is that he might be training himself to not respond as easily or as desired to what's
mhm.
going on in front of him. The problem is we don't really know until it's already happening. And I work with men all the time who have issues with performance anxiety, who have issues with early ejaculation, delayed ejaculation,
Mm,
erectile dysfunction. And
mhm.
sometimes we can figure out that the causality is the type of masturbation, the type of fantasizing, the type of pornography use that they're using is so different than what's real that their brains don't really know the difference.
Oh, wow.
So I now can tell you some of the recommendations that I have when it comes to pornography use and making sure that it stays healthy in your relationship is to do the following. The first is erotic literature can
Oh,
often do the same thing to your arousal and to stimulation that pornography does without having to deal with any of the overtly contrasting differences between the fantasy and the reality. So when you're reading erotic novels or erotic short stories, they can be very graphic, they can be very different, they can be very fantasy. But what you can do more easily than when you're watching somebody, other actors, is you can put yourself in that situation or you can see it as I'm just reading a book.
mm,
Oftentimes, the descriptions that they put in them can be really great to help men, especially, learn more about foreplay and how extensive it can be. And it can also help women to avoid the ick when they're watching because they can picture whatever they want to picture. They can use their imagination when it comes to really any of the characters. Sometimes they will give a little bit more detail about what they might look like, but
mhm,
not so much that you're like, oh gosh, that is so not sexy. Um, and some of the traumatic secondary trauma that we were talking about earlier, that can be avoided as well just by changing the page or skipping forward without having
okay.
to actually see any of it. There is so much erotic literature out there that there is something for everyone. I'm a big fan of making sure that you kind of peruse through some of the pages to make sure that there aren't any, maybe there isn't any offensive language to you. What might be offensive to you might be totally fine for me, and vice versa. And so before you buy, just take a look inside.
Mm,
The other part of it is that I can tell you it can be so graphic. People's imaginations and ability to write things out can be very graphic. So, again, if that's not what you're looking for, or if it is, there's
mhm.
something for you out there.
Oh,
in
okay.
order to, yeah. And then the other part of it is that I'm often encouraging people that in their solo session, so this would be masturbation,
Mhm.
is to also include erotic literature, but then include your own partner in your fantasies. So anytime you're fantasizing, really try to focus on you and your partner, either things that you've done, things that you've almost done, things that you've talked about. And I am working on something that is all about that. So make sure you stay tuned for more about that. I'm a big fan of helping people to keep their imagination and fantasy within the realm of reality more often than not, so that they don't get caught up in that accidentally training their brains and their bodies to only respond to exaggerations of the truth, to pure
Mhm.
fantasy, and to things that aren't realistic and don't look anything like what they're doing with their partners.
Mhm.
Do you have any more questions regarding what we've talked about? Any more maybe details that you want or recommendations?
Is it normal for men in relationships to watch a lot of porn, especially if they've been watching it from a very young age? Like, if I'm not okay with it, how can I go about it?
So I don't know if the necessarily the question is whether or not it's normal. I think that there are lots of things that are normalized in our society that aren't necessarily the best practices for healthy relationships. Pornography tends to cause more problems than to help them. So
Mm-hmm.
if he's
Okay.
watching, you said he's watching a lot or he's maybe too much. That in and of itself lets me know that you're concerned about it. And if there's a concern there, chances are there's something more that we need to kind of discuss. What
Mhm.
makes you feel like it's too much or it's a lot?
I have had the conversation with him. A week ago, I brought it up. I decided to put it out there, especially because he noticed that I started to behave a certain way towards him. So,
What did you say?
well, I asked him straight out, like, I just want you to be honest, but I was, I already knew in the past that he watched porn because I would joke around and be like, "Oh, I found your porn," but I didn't. It was just me joking around. But he doesn't hide it. He's very truthful, and I know, and he's told me in the past that he has watched porn, and that he's been exposed to it from a very young age. And I know that I went online a while ago and I searched that it's worse for the person who's been exposed to it from an extremely young age. I'm not entirely sure how young he was when he was initially exposed to it, but the fact that he started from a very young age and that he still watches porn now, it makes me a little bit concerned.
Watching and being exposed to pornography, again, very fantasy, not very realistic, very produced, especially when you're not getting any other information about sexuality and you're
Mm-hmm.
not having anything to compare it, no quality and valuable information regarding the topic. If
Mm-hmm.
pornography, which again, we're going back to this fantasy, it's usually has while there may be consent represented, there might not be. There might be activities that are much more geared towards male pleasure than female pleasure. There might be these kind of unrealistic expectations that are expressed and documented. All of that can lead, especially younger brains and younger minds, to think, oh, this is what sex is. And
Mm-hmm.
as adults, we can say, oh no, there's a difference between this, there's a difference between that, there's a difference
Mm-hmm.
between reality TV and there's a documentary. There's a
Right.
whole lot of differences and distinctions that we can make with our adult brains. Sometimes it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to do that even then, but
Mm-hmm.
because men tend to be socialized to explore their bodies through masturbation far earlier than women are, there
Mm-hmm.
is quite a bit of time, usually like a decade,
Mm-hmm.
between when they start masturbating and start, looking into what's going to get them aroused, and that could be
Mm-hmm.
through pornography if they have access to it, to
Mm-hmm.
college, 11 to 21 or 9 to 19, there is a lot of time to get in
Mm-hmm.
this fantasy world of, oh, this is what sex is, this is what is. And guess
Mhm.
what? It's not what sex is.
Right.
Especially in a long term relationship, it doesn't look that way. And so there is this trap that they could be falling into of looking at images that are reinforcing all of this unrealistic part of sex. And so
Mm.
it can be very unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does your partner, does he tend to kind of imagine or want things that you feel are unrealistic? Is he perpetually seeking something new to do? Is he like, what are the activities that make you think he might possibly be negatively impacted by his pornography usage?
Well, I feel like our intimacy level has dropped down. Obviously, it's not the same as it was in the very beginning. I know in the very beginning when we were dating, it's a different phase. We're like really into each other and all that stuff. But it has gotten to a point where we're not constantly doing it as much anymore, or we hug and stuff like that, and that's fine and all. But sometimes our intimacy level hasn't synced. Sometimes I don't even know if he's interested or not. I know that he has some of his concerns that he's talked to me about, but more than anything is I feel like because our intimacy level is not even, it's very little now. So I don't
So
know if
you
him watching it is like part of the reason why.
so when you say the word intimacy, what are you referring to?
Basically, we're not having sex as much.
Okay. And when you mean sex and when you say sex, when you say sex, do you mean intercourse? Do you mean oral play? Do you mean like what in particular are you referring to?
Intercourse for the most part, yeah.
So the frequency of let's say a year ago or 3 years ago, however long you've been together from the beginning to now, how has the frequency changed?
It's not
Okay.
even like once a week, once a month, or anything like that. It literally is like before we started recently, before it'd be like once every 6 months or something, or it just wouldn't happen.
Okay. And this would be with initiation attempts from you or only from him? How was that going?
I know that at first it was initiation wise, it was him. And just because I wasn't like, to be honest, he has more experience than I do in regards to intercourse and all that stuff. So for me to initiate, it was very hard. So when I started noticing the difference and when I started to feel like I wanted it, I would approach him and I'd tell him straight out, like, I want you. And I'd kiss him and stuff like that. I've even gone to like ask him, like, what are his turn ons? Like, what is it in that regard? And I know that in regards to him right now, he feels a little bit insecure about his self being, which I completely respect. Because I'm aware that he watches porn, I thought that, oh, well, and because he's told me he watches porn, he would watch porn on a daily basis and stuff. I started thinking, well, then what are the chances that him watching porn and, self pleasure is not also the reason that it's affecting us not being as intimate and as we used to be.
So it sounds like your concern is that because he's looking at pornography very regularly and y'all are having intercourse or any sexuality very rarely,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think I said that right? You're watching
Yeah.
it very regularly. Okay. Um, so with his regular porn usage and your concerns about having very irregular instances of sexuality, I think it makes sense for you to try to draw that conclusion. If he is struggling with self-esteem issues, with insecurities for his own body, possibly performance anxiety, is there any help that he's tried to get for that?
He's looking into it because he thinks, now that I brought it up, he thinks that, okay, his body image and stuff like that, the way that he feels right now, it's not doing any good. And it feels like he's been struggling for this for many years, but the fact that it's now seems to be going into affecting our own relationship, he's considering things that he hadn't considered before.
And when you say that he uses pornography, do you believe that he's also masturbating? Or are those two
Yes.
separate things?
No, I think he's masturbating to them. Yeah.
It sounds like he has a very active solo sex life, but your
Mhm.
partnered sex life is kind of dwindled.
Right.
And just so you know, from a clinical standpoint, we tend to consider sexless relationships or sexless marriages as fewer than twice a month. Definitely sounds like you would qualify for that label as well. And that's
Mm.
only to say that, not everybody needs to have sex multiple times a week to be happy,
Hmm.
but you don't seem happy with the lack of sexuality in your relationship. And it probably concerns you that he might be substituting your partnered experiences for what he has going on with pornography and masturbation.
Right. That is exactly.
Have you asked him about why y'all haven't been having more partnered experiences?
Yes, and I was even curious to know why he watches it because I know that a lot of people watch porn for different reasons. And I know that for him, he told me that he watches it sometimes because he's bored, and at times because he wants to ejaculate. He wants to experience the arousal. And then in regards to the reasons why we or he believes that it's affecting our intimacy, or why he doesn't, is like you mentioned, and I hadn't considered it before, but performance wise, because he's not at the level that he used to be before when we were in the beginning of our relationship. He energy wise and stuff like that, he doesn't have it. So sometimes he feels that instead of being in the moment, he's distracted by, oh, I need to keep up.
So,
Mm-hmm.
how many years have you been together as a couple, monogamously and exclusively?
We've been together for about for 5 years, actually, almost 5 years, I believe. Yeah.
And of those 5 years, how long has sexuality or the lack of sex been an issue for you?
Probably for the last, I think it's more because we've moved in together. We decided to move in together and stuff like that compared to before. We've almost gone to 2 years living together, so I think that's probably the reason why. Because I thought before, well, we're not living under the same roof. We barely see each other. We have different schedules. I don't know if maybe that had something to do with the frequency level on intimacy or having intercourse compared to now. But yeah, I think I hadn't considered it before, but yeah, because we've been living together for 2 years now, and we're basically on the same schedule now. We go to work together, we come back together and stuff. We're here on our days off practically every single day and stuff.
So, back when y'all weren't living together, would y'all have sex usually every time you saw each other, or was it very few and far between as well?
Few and far between. It wasn't every single time. Yeah, it was now and then. I know in the very beginning when we started, it was constantly. It was, every single time we would see each other. Sometimes, like if I would spend the weekend with him or something, it would be during the weekend or two times during the weekend.
So, what frequency are we talking about here? Back when you were not living together, out of the times that y'all were actually in the same space, physical space, what percentage would you say of the times that you'd see each other would you actually engage in some sort of sexual experience?
If I had to put a percentage to it, I'd probably say between 60 to 75% of the time.
And now that you're living together, what would you say the percentage is of the time that you're actually together versus the opportunities that y'all take to have sex?
I'd probably say that it's like 10% or less.
Again, if you were to tell me, like, hey, I'm fine with it, we bond in so many other ways, we feel intimate affection wise and emotionally in so many other ways, we don't have to have intercourse to feel close,
Mm.
that's one thing. But when
Mm.
it's such a drastic change and you can see that it's not that neither one of you is interested in sex, it just seems like he's not really showing interest in the way that he used to.
Mm.
And because his porn usage has stayed stable and stayed steady,
Mhm.
I can see why you're trying to make sense of that. Are there other ways that his low self esteem has shown up?
It is something that he's been struggling for. a really long time, even before we became a couple. I literally have known him for about 8 years. We started as coworkers. So I've known with the struggles and stuff like that, but it wasn't until the last few years that his self esteem has dropped even steeper. And I'm pretty sure it has to do because he doesn't feel like himself in the sense that he's gained a lot of weight. He doesn't
Hmm.
have the same energy that he used to
Okay.
before. Yeah.
So it sounds
So,
like his desire level overall has probably dropped quite a bit with the low energy, the low body image.
mhm,
But again, pornography, you can do that alone. You can focus outside of yourself, and it also distracts your brain quite a bit. So he doesn't
mhm,
have to remember that he's in his own body. But I do think that that can cause, in the future, with your
mhm,
partner experiences, it can probably cause some issues there because there's a disconnect between the mind and body. When you
mhm.
have had sexual experiences, are there any performance issues that you've noticed with the two of you versus back in the day?
Yeah, I think that we don't last long. Like we both get tired real quick. And I don't know if I know for me, like, I don't have the same energy. I don't exercise as much, which is part of the reason why I try to exercise so that I could keep up. But I feel like before we would be able to keep up a little bit more compared to now. Sometimes we don't even climax all the way, meaning that we could be in the act and I'm thinking, okay, this is good or whatever. And then after a certain point, like, we get tired and we just lose our focus and we're like, all right, well, we gave it a try. We tried it, but we're both tired or we both cannot keep up. And what,
Okay.
instead of retrying again or something or trying to get back into it, it just stops right there.
So we've talked a lot about his situation and what's going on with his masturbation. Are you doing any solo pleasuring sessions?
I am, and I don't know if, like, I had stopped for a while. I was good, and I feel like ever since noticing that we're not doing as much, the times that I have done self pleasure has increased compared to in the beginning.
So you might be kind of reacting very similarly, which is, well, we're not having partnered experiences, so now I'm going to have solo sessions. And while I do think it's so important for you to continue to have orgasms and pleasure and have that blood flow for your physical body, I'm concerned of the building up of resentment that could possibly be happening because it sounds like you wish you were doing at least some of that with him.
Yes. Yes, I honestly do. Just because I feel like being intimate, having intercourse is just an important piece in our relationship. I can't really express in every relationship because, like you said, some people could be okay with it. But I feel like it just brings us closer together. And because it allows us to be vulnerable with each other, and I feel like we connect.
We're coming to an end in all of this, but I wanted to give you some recommendations. First
Okay.
of all, continue to keep the communication open about this topic. What you don't want to do is hold back way too much and for too long with your frustration, with your disappointment, because then by the time it comes out, it's going to spill out and it'll cause issues in the rest of your relationship. The other thing that I would recommend is that everything that you can do to improve your physical health positively impacts your sexual health. So if
Okay.
he's working on building up his energy with you, maybe you start to go on walks for 10 minutes at some point during the day, 4 times a week, whenever you decide. The other piece of it is making sure that if y'all are going to be having solo sessions, that you're doing something like reading erotic literature or using your imagination and trying to stay away from pornography at this point, just
Okay.
because it has become a habit. It's
Okay.
much more like a, well, this is what I do, and I'm concerned that then you start to really forget how to imagine and how to really have that mind body connection.
Mm.
The last thing that I would say is if you're really trying to get serious about resetting your intimate connection, you can try the Dr. Viviana method for intimate reconnection. There are programs online at drviviana.com. That's DOCTORVIVIANA.com. And you can check out the different types that I have to help you go through the process very, very methodically of getting your sex life back on track. This is for people like yourselves who have gone through periods of months or even years without having a satisfying, consistent, reliable sex life. The Dr. Viviana method for intimate reconnection was built from years of helping couples who are like, we want to have sex because we love each other, but we don't even know where to begin. We have a lot of love for each other. We just don't have that lust anymore. Sometimes it gets very awkward and it starts to ease into the rest of the relationship where now all of a sudden it's like, in order to avoid sex, they will stop kissing, they'll stop hugging, they'll stop.
Mm.
It feels really awkward if they're watching a sex scene on TV,
Hmm.
and all of that. And I see you nodding your head, and all of that seems like it might be where you're at. Um,
Yeah.
if he's not willing to decrease the instances of solo pleasuring with pornography usage, that might be a sign that he might have developed a bit of a compulsion for it.
Mhm.
And I think that's when he would definitely benefit from seeing a certified sex therapist. We would be able to help him to get that control back for himself. So I think
Mm.
that that could, you know, maybe a good option if he's unwilling or unable to cut back
Mhm.
on that. The other thing that I think y'all might need to work on is initiating more opportunity for sexuality. The last recommendation that I have for you is to read my book, The Four Intimacy Styles. I want to send this to you. I'm going to sign it. I want the two of you to read it together. It brings up a lot of the topics that we've been talking about and can help you to get motivated and inspired to bring your sexual relationship back on track and bring it to the forefront. You know, life can totally get in the way. All of the obligations and even just the mundane stuff that happens on a daily basis can easily zap our sexual energy. So, hopefully, reading my book will bring that back to the forefront.
Mm.
I am
Thank
so
you.
grateful for you, for your candidness, and of course for caring so much about your sex life. I'm really excited to be able to be a part of hopefully a new chapter between you and your partner going forward. And I look forward to keeping in touch and hopefully getting an update in a few months to see how things are going.
Of course. I mean, I'm very grateful for you taking the time. I know it's not an easy topic. Not everybody talks about it. So, being able to communicate with you, and because I know that you're an expert in, you've been doing this for years, it puts me at ease because I get to hear from somebody instead of just reading it on the internet. So, again, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me.
Well, I'm wishing you the best, and I'm wishing you love and lust going forward, and we'll keep in touch. Thanks for listening. If you'd like an opportunity to ask me your relationship and intimacy related questions, DM the letters AMA for Ask Me Anything to at drviviana.com on Instagram, and I'll send you the link to submit your question.